Other people have birthdays. Why are we treating yours like a funeral?
Bones, I don't want to be lectured.
What the hell do you want? This is not about age. And you know it. It's about you flying a goddamn computer console when you want to be out there hopping galaxies.
Spare me your notions of poetry, because we all have our assigned duties.
Fool. You're hiding. Hiding behind rules and regulations.
Who am I hiding from?
From yourself.
This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1855, retro movie review, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Laser beams, opinions like the seasons, and everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists. Come! Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is...
I'm Shane Kelly.
I'm Ian Levinstein.
I'm Adam Murdo.
I'm Chris Everly.
Buried alive. Buried alive.
That was too much fun.
Ian,
That was good.
Barely 2 minutes in, and
working
already
from
some
the producer's chair.
virtuoso performances.
Yeah, that was good.
Those of you not watching on YouTube, you missed some excellent lip sync work from Messrs. Kelly, Everly, and their prop game remains strong, even as Chris now takes a sip from his Star Trek branded mug.
My Klingon Defense
Now-
Force mug.
Oh, yeah.
I know that this is a Star Trek 3 movie phaser, but I don't have a Star Trek 2 one, so this is my favorite phaser from the movies and the old TV show.
Yeah, it's a nice one.
And then, but I do have the classic communicator proper replica. So
Well,
Nothing fancy.
You guys using your prop game reminded me that I have on my shelf. So this is the
well,
Look at that.
even makes the noise. It's good times.
That's
I know
a
Ian
next generation
stuff.
phaser, isn't it?
yeah, that's a Type
Yeah.
2 next gen phaser.
Yep.
I have a Voyager pad.
Look at this.
Oh my god.
I'm sorry for the rustling for those listening. It's tissue paper because I keep all this stuff wrapped. I have a Type 2 phaser from Next
Wow.
Generation.
Nice.
Do you have a
Um,
tribble, sir?
I used to have a Tribble. I do not anymore. But I did. I used to have a Tribble, stuffed Tribble.
I was
Like Ian's.
Oh, there you go.
Here's my
Ooh,
toy
ooh.
one.
Nice.
He's got an arsenal of tricorders here.
Ugh.
Look at this unveiling. It's like a magician.
Then a different, it's resin, but it has a little sensor that comes off.
And this has been your world of toys.
Yeah. Now that's all from the mid '90s when I was going to creation Star Trek shows down at Valley
Oh.
Forge.
Oh my god.
So
Well,
this one's actually aluminum.
I was really hoping I still had one of my Star Trek branded beers, but I drank them all a while because those were fun. They had a Romulan ale there, but instead I have some cerulean brandy tonight. So that's
Nicely done, sir. Nicely done.
get me rolling here. But before we get started with everything on this retro movie review, this anniversary retro movie review,
40 years.
40 years.
Yeah.
And hence why I had to use the birthday clip because it's too fitting.
Yep, 40 years this month.
Indeed. We are sponsored by you guys, the
Yes.
listeners, over at patreon.com/comicgeekspeak. We thank you so much for your continued support of the show in any way you choose to do
Hear,
so,
hear.
whether it be through the Patreon, whether it be through donations over at comicgeekspeak.com/donate.php, or whether it's just leaving a review on iTunes or spreading the word in any way that you can. We've been running as long as we have because of you, the listeners, and we continue to run because of you, the listeners, and we thank you so much.
17 years.
Help out. 17 years
Yeah.
and growing.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah.
And I did wear a red shirt. Hopefully, I'm not going to get phasered or transporter accidented into something.
We'll do our best, but no promises.
No promises.
Absolutely no promises. So, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, easily, and I'm not no hyperbole here, easily the best of the Star Trek franchise in my opinion.
I agree with that.
I concur wholeheartedly.
It manages to achieve a goal of simultaneously feeling like Star Trek the original series while also becoming something new and distinct. And
Well put, sir. Well put.
that's what it had to do, because Star Trek 1 is a lot of shots of a ship leaving.
But I'll tell you what, I have grown to like that movie quite a little bit more than I did, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah. And mind you, I mean, a lot of that first Star Trek movie was taken from what was supposed to be the second Star Trek
Phase 2.
Exactly. Yep. A lot of the concepts in that one are pulling over to there.
Yep.
But before I get in too much into my thoughts, I'm going to start with Murd. Mr. Murdo, welcome to the world of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Murd, was this your first time?
Yep.
Wow.
Okay, perfect.
I think 4 Star Trek movies I've ever seen.
Wow. and how to do for you?
Well, entertaining enough, I suppose. It's best Star Trek movie I've seen, but again, I've only seen this one. What was it? Either The Undiscovered Country, I think.
That's another really good one.
Nemesis. What was that? That was the last Next Generation.
That's not so good.
Yep. I think those are actually the only ones I've seen, other than this one. Again, I don't have much of a frame of reference here. I kind of wish that I had watched the first one that everyone seems to be so down on, that has a reputation for being kind of long and plodding and boring and conceptually self-important and just not very action-oriented. But Chris assured me I didn't need to watch that to understand what was going on in Wrath of Khan, and sure
Not
enough.
at all.
But per his recommendation and through his generous contribution of resources, I was able to watch not only this movie, but the Space Seed episode of Original Trek, of which Wrath of Khan is a feature-length sequel.
Yep.
And it definitely enhanced my understanding of seeing that episode, Chris, so thank you for that recommendation.
A pleasure, brother.
It was kind of fun comparing not only the whole crew, but Ricardo Montalban, as he was in 1966, to the Mad Max makeover he and his people received for this film. Yeah, it's one thing this movie has that apparently the first Trek motion picture didn't have, and a lot of episodes of the original Trek TV series didn't have, was a definite dynamic of hero versus villain. Just a strong antagonistic dimension, and just a lot of feints and outer space dogfights and strategizing and all of that. It's just swashbuckling good guy versus bad guy fun, and so it was an entertaining popcorn picture for that reason. But it still means the usual Trek level of philosophy and ideology and all of that. And it contained a couple of legendary moments that even I, as a relative neophyte to all things Trek, was familiar with because it's been quoted so often. Of course, the bellowing of Khan, which seemed to be a little bit overdone given the circumstances. But then I realized that it's not just Shatner acting, it's Shatner acting as Kurt acting, because he had a plan the whole time, and he just wanted Khan to think that he was just screaming in frustration and defeat and despair, when in actuality he'd had coded communications with the Enterprise, and he had a backdoor out of the situation all along. So that's why the Khan thing worked.
Please give William Shatner an excuse to overact. Just
Majestic Hambone.
Yes. Let it make sense to the plot, even.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really shouldn't say that this is the first time I've seen this movie, because look, guys, this. Those brain slug things that Khan introduced to the ear canals of Chekhov and the captain of the Reliant.
Terrell. Yep.
Were they seen in any of the other Trek pictures, like maybe Search for Spock, or was this the only one?
There was a version of them in the first Star Trek reboot.
Oh, okay.
If
we're counting those, I have seen the first 2 of those, the first 2 Chris Pine Star Trek movies.
Yeah, a version of those was used in the first one, and that's my only recollection of them.
That's great you did, Murd, because Into Darkness is the new version of Khan, so we can certainly talk about that too.
I saw that one before I saw the original.
Yeah.
It was on FX network over the winter sometime. But anyway, when I was a young lad of maybe 6 years old, one Sunday afternoon at my grandmother's house, a couple of my older cousins were hanging out. I don't even remember why we were all there. It might have been a holiday. But Wrath of Khan was on TV on one of the local, it was, just syndicated on one of the local TV stations. And we got to the part where I guess they were trapped in the core of the planetoid, and Chekhov finally got the brain burrowing bobbit worm out of his ear canal, and it leaked to the floor in a pool of his blood.
Now, that must have freaked out little Adam, I think.
I remember distinctly covering my eyes and running from the room. I was a very squeamish child, and on top of that, my father made some joke. Oh, he had an earache, and I.
God.
As a child, I was prone to sinus and ear infections. I had a lot of them, so from that point on, I couldn't experience the pain of an ear infection without thinking of some cranium-crawling alien crawdad wriggling around in my ear.
Cranium-crawling alien crawdad. You hit
It
your
wrap itself around my medulla oblongata and make me, susceptible to mental hypnotic suggestion. So yeah, that was my experience with Wrath of Khan, and that one image has lived with me in my brain, ironically enough, for many a year. But now I've gotten to see it in context, and at the age of 43, I think I was better prepared to handle it.
You know that special sauce? Yo.
Yeah, so I may put in a couple of words here and there as with the conversation unwinds, but for this voyage of the starship, the CGS, I am but a lowly ensign fresh out of Starfleet Academy. I'm the one who should be wearing the red shirt, Shane. Instead, I'm wearing a t-shirt, beige, the color of the sands of Ceti Alpha 5, so it can just blend into the background. I will let you gentlemen, you seasoned Starfleet captains and navigators, discussion in respectful silence for the most part.
Oh, jeez.
I will say that I'm probably second on that list, Murd. I've still yet to see all of Star Trek. I've seen most of Star Trek. There's even some original series episodes that I don't believe I've seen to this point. And I've watched all of that. I've watched all of Next Generation. I've watched all of Deep Space Nine. I'm like 2.5 seasons away from being done with Voyager, and I slowly but surely go back to it every now and then. I've watched some Enterprise, and I'm done with Picard and watching the new stuff as well. I'm a season behind on Discovery, and I'm watching Strange New Worlds as it's airing, but I'm a little bit behind on that too. But movie-wise, I hadn't actually seen Wrath of Khan until I was an adult. I think the first time I saw it, I was maybe 24 or something like that.
Wow.
And that was when I was watching all of the movies in order. I sat down and I watched them all from one until done, basically, to get myself prepared for the reboots, and understand, the lore itself and why these reboots are necessary or why they're not. I will say I am a staunch believer and will die by this sword that Star Trek Into Darkness is not a good movie.
I disagree completely.
I will die by that sword because I do not believe it needed to be redone. And I think also, quite frankly, Ricardo Montalban being Ricardo Montalban, to have Benedict Cumberbatch play Khan was kind of disrespectful in some ways. I understand why they were going for an established actor and why they were going for somebody who could literally play, dirt. And that's what Benedict Cumberbatch could do. You have him play anything and he'll at least do a damn fine job of it. But within the parameters, it just didn't feel right to me. And I continue to stick by that. And it may have very well soured me on the whole experience, but that whole day was weird because I was supposed to see it for free, and they overbooked the theater, and I wound up having to see it across the street in RPX, as that was the only showing that was showing at the time, and it was not a great day. But I've yet to rewatch that movie after I watched it the first time.
See, I just watched it again yesterday. And I'll say this because I don't want to take too much of your interstitial time, but
yeah,
I would lovingly disagree, only that I think Cumberbatch did a different interpretation of Khan.
Right.
That is not I think is very different from Montalban. So it actually worked for me. But we can talk about that.
While I agree that it's a different interpretation, I just don't agree with the premise of Benedict Cumberbatch playing Khan. I think they should have found another man of ethnic origin similar to Ricardo Montalban in order to play Khan. But that's
Fair enough.
Yeah, I enjoyed it well enough, but I was disappointed that they felt the need to recreate it that soon in a franchise like that and try to trick you into thinking it wasn't him and then it was him. That part just disappointed me. But it's a fine film.
Yeah.
But I didn't think the Khan part needed to be done.
Marketing did fail them, Shane. Like that much you could safely say, because them kept keeping on saying it's not Khan, and us being like it's totally Khan. It's not Khan. It's totally Khan. Just admit it's Khan. And then the movie comes out. Hey, guess what? It's Khan. It's not exactly a surprise. But I don't want to get too much into Inner Darkness. We're talking about Star Trek II here, but that's just that's my rant, and I'm sticking to it. Shane, how many times have you seen this movie?
I can't even count, because I've watched it since I was a kid, and I've listened to it countless times while it's just playing in background, whether it's at home doing something or just in my ear working or mowing the lawn, whatever. The first Star Trek movie I saw okay, I'll back up. I did watch Star Trek, the show, in reruns.
Okay.
So I know I saw almost all the episodes as a young kid, and I'm talking like 4 and 5 years old. When Star Wars came out, I was already watching Star Trek on reruns. I was already playing with Mego Star Trek dolls that were out there. So I had a history of Star Trek. Not that I would remember ever seeing Space Seed. I'm sure it aired, and I'm sure I watched it. I didn't remember it at all. Then take it to where I was going to see Star Wars Empire and Jedi in the theaters. But when the motion picture came out, I don't think I saw that in the theater. I think the first time I saw that was on HBO. And then I became friends with a couple kids in the neighborhood. They were brothers, and they were very, very much Star Trek fans. One brother was a year younger. One was a year older. Their mom and dad were Star Trek fans. So I was up playing at their house one afternoon, and they put in a VHS tape of The Wrath of Khan. So this has got to be like 1983, 84, when they had rented it from West Coast Video or whatever. So that was the first time I saw Star Trek II. Then I saw Star Trek III, I'm fairly certain, on HBO. The first one I saw in the theater was actually Voyage Home, Star Trek IV. So to watch Star Trek II that had to be like 7th or 8th grade. So I was like 12, 13. And I didn't remember Space Seed. I didn't watch Space Seed before. I just watched Star Trek II. And I enjoyed it thoroughly without really realizing that it came from Space Seed and was a sequel. I learned that after seeing it, and then figured out watching it at some point on a VHS tape, and then watched it with Star Trek II. So from that point on, there's plenty of times where I watched Space Seed, Star Trek II, and then sometimes even 3 and 4, because 2, 3, and 4 make such a nice package together, as they were kind of intended to be in the end.
Oh, sure.
So, I've just had this long history since I was 12 with watching Wrath of Khan any chance I got. At that time, even through 4, as much as I enjoyed 3 and 4, Star Trek II was the pinnacle of everything at that time.
Yeah, and also at the time, Star Wars had made sci-fi trilogies a thing.
Yeah.
And although this is the second of the Star Trek movies, clearly 2, 3, 4, that's a trilogy and was intended to be. So, and
I'm not sure if it was intended to be a trilogy until 3 came out. 2, I'm fairly certain, would have been standalone.
Yeah.
Especially everything that happens to Spock. It was after that when they started talking about getting him back involved. He wanted to direct. Then they made 3, and then they made 4, and it became a trilogy.
Plus, Star Trek II did really well.
Yeah. Incredibly well.
They do show you. Don't they show you the pod at the end of Wrath of Khan though? Like
yes,
it lands on the Genesis planet. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So
yeah. But I often wonder if that was not an afterthought as a backdoor, but there was no plans, because at that point he was done.
Fair.
Well before
they also shot the scene where he does remember, and he does the bond with McCoy.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Clearly, at that point, they were at least leaving
something. Yeah. At least for somebody else, even if it wasn't Leonard Nimoy that would have come back, somebody else could have gotten that and been a Spock, although I don't think that would have played well. There was plenty of backdoors at that point for something. but yeah, I've loved the movie. Again, I can't count how many times I've watched or listened to it. There was a time when I was younger that I could, like I could Star Wars at one time. I could recite the whole darn thing, but I can't do that anymore.
I assume you're in a similar situation, Chris. I assume you've seen this many a time.
Yes, and in fact, I was fortunate enough at the age of 9 to see it in the theater.
Oh, wow.
Awesome.
And I remember it vividly because I'm sure I probably saw some of the original series in syndication before that as like a little kid. But in my memory, this, pun intended, is the genesis of my love for Star Trek.
Okay.
So it's 1982, and my parents take my brother and I, I'm 9 years old, to see this movie. My parents, knew Star Trek. And I remember as a kid, I was completely blown away by the film. Now, a lot of things I love about the film now dawned on me when I was older, but just seeing what essentially was like this naval battle in space, which is definitely one of the things they were going for in this movie.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That thrilled me. And just because there's always, whenever you watch something involving Star Trek, there's always this aspect that's almost a little creepy and just kind of, it's intentionally otherworldly. So whether it was, the planet Khan's people were on, or the aforementioned insect, just everything about the movie just totally captured my imagination. I remember my parents explained to me, oh, there was an episode in the series with Khan, and then I remember we watched at some point after that. In fact, I think WPIX played it around the time the movie was out, if I remember correctly. And it began my lifelong love for the Star Trek universe, and I devoured everything I could after that. And I remember how much excited I was when 3 came out, which I think is very underrated. I love Star Trek.
Oh, I love Star Trek 3.
Especially
right up to when they steal the Enterprise.
It gets a bad rap.
That's another one where I've definitely grown to appreciate it more over the years. That the beginning sequence of Star Trek 3 is superb. Like I am all for that beginning, and then it's a little slow in the middle, and then by the end it picks it all up.
Yeah, I love it. So, and as Shane said, it's a trilogy. I mean, it's really about Kirk and Spock and their journey. And what I love so much, I'll say this just my initial thoughts about 2, I especially appreciate this as I got older and I knew more about Star Trek, is that I think 2, and I think this is where the first movie failed, 2 really captures the all-important dynamic between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy.
Yes.
Which is essential to the whole series.
Oh, sure.
And for me, the best episodes of the original series and then in the movies is when they go to the heart of that, that triumvirate, so to speak, and you appreciate the impact both Spock and McCoy have on Kirk, both as a human being and as a captain, and how they all relate to each other. And it's magic. I mean, the scene where the 3 of them gather in the conference room to figure out what Genesis is, it's just them talking, but you feel the history and the weight of their relationship. And those actors, of course, by that point were so well versed in those characters and that dynamic between them. And it's a special film. Like Murd said, it's a great popcorn movie. There's great action. I think Khan is one of the all-time great villains in Star Trek easily, but in really in any franchise. Like there's something so captivating about, in both the original episode, Space Scene, and in the film, of how Montalban plays Khan.
Oh yeah,
because you can't, and in fact, Kirk says this in the original Space Scene. You can't help but admire Khan.
And I'll tell you something, Chris. Just piggybacking off of that, it's a good place to insert this. Montalban, when he decided to take up the role, he was doing, of course, Fantasy Island at the time, and he had become so connected to that character that he had to rewatch Space Seed multiple times in order to recapture Khan, because he had lost the character. It had been years, and he basically had to get himself back into that mindset. And boy, oh boy, did he get himself back into that mindset.
And let me tell you, I think besides what I mentioned, the three main characters in the conference, I think my favorite scene in the film is when Chekhov and Terrell first encounter Khan and his people in the cargo vessel. And when Montalban removes his mask, which of course is very dramatically done, and then he's reminiscing about, I was a prince,
Yeah.
power over millions, and there's just something. There's such. I mean, on the one hand, it's so hammy, but at the same time, it's also majestic. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
but you also just described like Star Trek acting,
exactly. But see, and they're well put in, because when you think about it, it's probably really hard to kind of thread that needle.
Yes.
Because as we all watch Star Trek, a lot of times they don't. But in this film and in these sequences, for the most part, they really do.
Mm-hmm.
And like when Khan, like you assume his wife is the historian from Space Seed who left with him.
Yeah.
And you feel his grief, my beloved wife, and and all of that. And it's a great performance. I mean, I remember as a kid, I was in awe of Khan watching this movie. Just the super strength and just the fact that he was just like a master tactician and strategist, and everything he was doing was just so interesting. And again, I didn't appreciate yet like the way they had his crew dress, which was just totally early 80s, sci-fi. Like I expected to see like like an MTV video of like Loverboy appear or some of those bands like that. Like it was just
Duran.
exactly. It was, but his performance is really one of the highlights of that film for me. And like every time he's on screen, and plus the great dynamic with his first mate.
Yes.
Which was always kind of thought to be his son.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's heavily implied, but the most depressing part about that first mate is that he is uncredited in.
I noticed that. I watched it yesterday. He's uncredited. It's a very important role.
There's a story behind that. IMDb is great about trivia for this movie in particular, and I've got tons of it. But apparently, his agent was fully convinced that if they were to say no to the credit, that they would wind up getting a better deal out of that, and then eventually being able to get more money out of the production crew later on. And obviously, that never happened because that's just stupid.
Yeah.
And that is why he is uncredited in the
Get
film.
out. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous because that's a career changing trajectory there.
Well, it's a prominent role. I mean, he's
Absolutely.
the only other speaking part out of all of Khan's people.
Agreed. Yeah. So that's,
and in fact, the name of the character is Joachim.
Yes.
Because in Space Seed there is a character with that name.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm again, they're trying, I guess, to establish that continuity. But
the other thing was originally Madeline Rue was going to reprise her role as Maria McGivers.
MacGyver's, really?
Yeah, MacGyver's.
Okay.
Yeah, but she the actress was actually suffering from multiple sclerosis at the time. She was already confined to a wheelchair. She was still acting, but they decided to write the character out, rather than have her, show up in the way that she was. So
that is a real shame.
Yeah. Some trivia and things that if you think about it, maybe you all have, maybe not. One thing is when Chekhov and Terrell do meet Khan, Chekhov was never in Spacey because he wasn't on the show at that point, which is awesome. That Khan's like, I remember you. No, you really don't. But that's just the way
he was like a comic. He was off panel.
Yeah. He was an ensign off panel, the red shirt, the no name. Yeah. But it's funny to think about that. I like how Kirk and Spock especially exploit Khan's lack of experience in modern spacefaring ways.
Yes.
Like, as intelligent as he is, he still doesn't think the way they would think because of flying around in 3 dimensions.
He's not trained. Yeah.
He's not trained. He's not really good with that yet. The other thing that this is the mother of the friends that I had back then that mentioned to me in one of our watchings of it. And it makes total sense, especially after you watch Space Seed. The first thing that Khan does is ask to look at engineering technical manuals
Yep.
and studies them. So then you get to where he's on the Reliant, and all hell is breaking loose, and he's looking for the override and
Where's
can't
the
find it
override?
because it's not there in the same place. It's a completely different ship. He didn't study that. He only studied the Constitution class.
Sure.
Yep.
So just some neat things that really don't mean a whole lot.
Well put, Shane.
But
Well put.
extra little tidbits if you are invested in the lore, if you've watched it enough, if you think about it just a little bit beyond. It's a great popcorn movie that you might enjoy it a little bit more, and those kind of things every time they come up. Even oh my gosh, what's David's mother's name?
Marcus,
Dr. Marcus, Carol Marcus.
Carol Marcus. When she's on the video promoting Genesis, and she talks about how they're doing it and hoping that the Federation can bring it to their logical conclusion, she's appealing to the Vulcan side of the world that would have influence on the vote. Like just all these little tidbits
Shane.
that get thrown into it that you don't even think about it, and it doesn't change the story at all. But if you think about what they're talking about and how much they invested in the script and the details that go into that time period to be historical, to be realistic, it's impressive to me. And I know tons of movies do it, but it's just something impressive to me about Star Trek II doing it.
Although, of course, now watching this movie in 2022, we have to be aware of the sliding time scale that is Star Trek, as you know, Khan from the year 1996.
Yeah.
I don't remember the genetic manipulation and gene war of 1996.
Not to mention World War III.
World War III. Yeah.
And they've slid that a little bit further with the most recent. I don't want to say it. Never mind.
Well,
I don't want to spoil it.
But actually, Shane, I watched the first episode of the new show, which was excellent. What is it called?
Well,
Strange.
That's not the show I was talking about.
But one of the crew members has Khan's name.
Yes, and they explore that in a couple.
Okay,
episodes.
I'm hoping
they talk
so.
about
All right,
that.
good.
Yeah.
Right.
I haven't gotten there yet, but I look forward to getting it.
There's a reason they talk about it in the show that's actually quite interesting. Total sidebar. That Strange New World show, that is just utterly spectacular to me.
It is. It really
Every episode is brilliant right now.
Devouring more of it.
Yep.
My favorite is episode 4. It's a hell of a lot of fun.
Okay.
Let me start with this question, gentlemen. So what do we think of the opening scene? Because that was meant to actually convince the audience that Spock was going to die in the beginning of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
What do we think of that opening scene, the training, Savick, and all that?
Well, I didn't really think that it would be anybody's foreshadowing, really, because they all died in that. But I kind of, at first you're like, well, who's this person sitting in the captain's chair? And you figure you'll find out. But when everyone starts dying, as a young kid watching, I'm like, what's going on? Everyone's dead.
What I will say is it's a terrific introduction to Savick.
Yes.
And that really sets the stage, because obviously we know they're not killing everybody off right away, but I can imagine sitting there in the theater the first time around being like, what the hell's going on?
No, and I think that's what they were going for.
And, and it's totally before holodeck, so there's no even inference of it's a holodeck program, because they didn't do that then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then finding out that it's all training, I mean, all makes sense. But it does go even further into the fact that one of the things that Nicholas Meyer tried to do with this movie, mind you, Nicholas Meyer really hasn't directed a lot outside of Star Trek II and Star Trek VI. Like, he
directed what's the movie about Jack the Ripper and time traveling?
Oh God, yeah, I know exactly.
I don't know.
It's a good movie, actually. I can't remember the name of it.
Is that the one with Jules Verne in it as well?
I think so.
Let's see. He's
Jack the Ripper goes into the present day or the 80s, whatever it is.
Is it, okay? So there's time after time.
Time after time. Okay.
Time after time.
Wow, I don't know if I saw that one.
Yeah, I've
worth seeing.
Yeah. Let's see. Malcolm McDowell.
David Warner was Jack the Ripper.
Yeah. It's Malcolm McDowell, Mary Steenburgen, David Warner.
Oh wow.
Yeah, do not see Christopher Lloyd offhand though. So
Christopher Reeve, but
Christopher Reeve.
No, that's somewhere in time.
That's somewhere in time.
Oh
yeah, which that's an awesome movie too.
Got it.
Either way, time was the key word.
But one of the things that he specifically tried to fix. Let me show the attire from Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and how
man.
drab it was.
Oh, it's terrible.
But I will say, I do think
Pajama party.
Kirk's Admiral's uniform makes the most sense.
Oh yes,
Yes, it does.
Absolutely. But then we get what we got in Star Trek 2, and he was specifically going for something more military.
And if you read the background, which I'm sure you have, Ian, Roddenberry was not a fan of these changes.
Yes.
And apparently they kind of like shushed him off to the side, essentially.
Yeah.
But I think the changes work well because Star Trek 2 has a very militaristic side to it because they're in combat. And one of the things that makes I think they wanted to draw the contrast to the first movie, which was very much steeped in, the for lack of a better term, the more philosophical side of Star Trek. How much weight you want to put into that idea, but this was, to me, this movie is great because it really focuses on the characters, and it focuses on the action and the adventure, and I think that's what made it such a success. And also, and most importantly, they really explore the Spock Kirk friendship,
absolutely,
which is at the core of the whole thing, and I think it's beautifully done in this film.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I have it always will be your friend, Yep.
So,
yeah, and I think all this was a direction that they had to go, but also one thing that I really appreciate about this, outside of what you said about the big three, I feel like the entire crew shines more here.
They couldn't agree more, because they all, even in the smaller moments, they all go to the essence of each character.
Yes,
because each character was well defined in the original series. He had a lot more time, of course, but even in small moments, like Sulu is very competent at the helm, and he's someone you can always count on, and Scotty, of course, the miracle worker. And by the way, I don't know if anybody, I actually for this watched the director's cut.
Well, and so when you were talking,
which goes into more characterization, actually.
When you were talking about watching it for the first time in TV, I'm sorry, Adam, catching it the first time in TV when you were younger, I'm wondering if you didn't have some of those scenes that were routinely shown on TV broadcasts that were never in the DVD, the VHS release at first, never in the movie theater. They were added just in TV viewings of it, for at least 2 or 3 scenes of added content.
Well, for example, they elaborate more on Scotty's nephew.
Yep.
Who was killed in the initial battle, which you don't really get that in the theatrical version.
My favorite part is that the runtime difference between the two of them is literally 244 seconds.
Oh yeah, it's just quick moments of dialogue. Really, it's nothing that dramatic, but it just again some nice character moments.
It's just funny to think about that, being called a director's cut. When it's
right. Now, I think the actor that played his nephew was when he was younger, was in Escape from Witch Mountain from Disney.
Oh, okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
Nice.
Now, Ian mentioned Saavik. I'm glad he did, because I think she's one of the most interesting and important characters in the movie.
Yes.
Kirstie Alley's first big role.
Yeah, it's her first big role, and I think she just nails it. I mean, she's such an interesting character because she's very much a Vulcan, but she's also, clearly taken in. Especially, she's obviously in awe of Kirk.
Yes.
And she's she's trying to understand the way he thinks and the way he conducts himself, and I thought she did it really well. Right to the end, where she actually sheds the tear during the ceremony for Spock. So she kind of has that sort of that crossover moment.
There's supposedly cut material which was supposed to explain that she's actually part Vulcan, part Romulan.
Yep.
That's why why she shed the tear, is that she has some more emotions than what's supposed to be present inside of a Vulcan.
That's interesting.
It's all cut material, never actually used in the movie.
Yeah. And much more less control than what Spock would have over his human half.
Certainly, yeah. And she got the role by literally doing a Leonard Nimoy impersonation. Like
really?
She is a huge Star Trek fan, specifically the original series. And she when she got the audition, she came in and she did her best Spock impersonation, and that got her the role. It was just plain and simple. I mean, again, talk about career changing. This was a spotlight for her, in a lot of ways.
And her performance serves as an excellent contrast, one of the key plot devices of the movie, which is the fact that people are aging.
Yes.
And Kirk, as you noted in the piece you played in the beginning, and Kirk is struggling, the man of action, with the fact that he's getting older and he's he's a bit more
Well,
desk bound, and it just
yeah,
they do that really well throughout the film. The
How
consequences.
do you feel?
that's
Old.
yeah. And that's what I was going to say. It's not even about just aging. It's about being desk ridden. It's about making the wrong choice when he thought he was probably doing the right thing by becoming an admiral, and it really killed his spirit in a lot of ways.
which Bones and Spock were pointing out. Plus,
Yeah.
the fact that he's now face to face with the consequences of his relationship with Marcus, this son who he's apparently has never known at all. I mean,
Yeah.
he knew he existed, and I think we're led to believe that David didn't know that he was his father.
At first, I don't think so.
Yeah.
like he says when he says like that Boy Scout he used to run
Yeah,
around with. So that leads you to believe that he didn't even know that Kirk was his father
yeah, that's what I thought
initially.
too.
Certainly, they certainly implied, and
Yeah.
it really wouldn't surprise me with the relationship that Kirk has with women in particular.
Well,
Well, and Carol said it too. She didn't want her son
in his
being
world.
idolizing him
Sure.
and being of the mind of, oh, well, I'll go join Starfleet like that. Keep him away, and that's to stifle that.
So is the Dr. Carol Marcus character unique to the Wrath of Khan, or is she?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's
a
unique.
Introduction of one
She's
of
unique.
Kirk's
No, she was created for the movie. Yep.
And
Yep.
then they gave her a backstory in the comic, in the DC comic, for what, 2 or 3 issues, I think it is.
Hmm.
And then I know I'm pretty sure she appeared in a novel too, in like a flashback novel. I'm pretty sure.
And then Alice Eve played her in Into
Yep.
Dark.
Into Darkness. Yeah.
Yep.
But go ahead, Ian, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm actually a little disappointed that was all we got of her.
Me too.
Character.
Yep.
I could have easily seen her, being like, I mean, not quite in character, but like, sort of like the new Chapel character, like the one that's the extra female voice of the crew, that we get a little bit more of, in each movie, but wasn't to be. Yeah.
Yep.
The other aspect of that I found very interesting was Kirk, when he takes the command of the ship again, he's rusty, and there are consequences to that. Like when Saavik is like saying you should do this, and like Spock like poo-poos her because she's speaking out, and basically she's trying to countermand the legend essentially. And he's like, my britches were down. And just all those moments where they're really capturing the fact that Kirk is in a moment of crisis in his life, like a midlife crisis in a sense, and he's not really sure what he's doing and where he should be. And you see the consequence of that cascade throughout the film. It's really well done.
Yeah. Now I won't disagree with you that he's a little rusty in that way, but I also thought that especially the bridges and the way he acted after he kind of defeated Khan that little bit for a while, he did that to boost her confidence.
Yes.
That's
as well.
certainly also feasible. Yep. Absolutely.
I liked how he was arguing with Spock about what they had to do, and Spock said, well, of course, if we're going on active duty, you've got to take command. He's like, no, but he really wanted to, but he's like, no, I don't have
Jim, I'm a Vulcan. I have no ego to bruise.
Yeah.
Yes, I can recite every line. Yes, that's how far down this rabbit hole I am.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Genesis as a planet and
of course,
and the effects that were used in this? And
1982, baby.
Oh my God!
First all digital effect created by ILM, if I'm not mistaken, ever in a movie.
Specifically, at least this is according to IMDb. This could easily be wrong here, but like the group that made it eventually became Pixar. Like,
I'm pretty sure that's true.
Yeah. So like this is the start of, digital effects and production for what would become, the most synonymous with it in the industry outside of ILM.
Yeah.
And Ian, as you're the most well versed in that, in terms of sensibilities for that, what'd you think of it?
I thought it was great, honestly. I think that and I feel this way about a lot of movies. In some ways, matte paintings and subtle effects hold up way more.
Oh, I agree 100%.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, like I could talk about the springiness of the jumping in Black Panther until the cows come home. So much of that movie works, and then you go to like the jumping physics, and it looks like a PlayStation 2. But yeah. I think that what they use this for, what they use the special effects for and the digital, recreations for is absolutely the way you do it. You use it as background and you use it as addition, not as main feature. And you notice it a lot less that way. And it's that much more impactful.
And I think this still you have on the screen from Star Trek 3, actually.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, when the planet starts to destroy itself.
Indeed.
Yeah, but that effect that's in Carol's presentation about the Genesis planet, the torpedo landing, and everything being rewritten to new code for the planet to thrive, then that's all the first digital effect ever in a movie like that.
Yep. Yeah.
What one question I want to ask you, fellas. What did you think about the decision that Kirk and Khan never actually met physically in the film? They were only competing essentially through the view screens.
I think it makes sense for what you're talking about, for how Khan got off of SETI Alpha 5, for his ruthlessness to take over and trap the Reliant crew, yet have a way to escape. There was no reason for them to really meet and duke it out in any way, shape, or form. All the threat was with Khan and everything that Kirk and the crew had to do to stop him. There really wasn't a need to beam back and forth and have a fisticuffs over it. That I think that would have watered it down and made it less impactful.
I agree.
Story.
I mean, I think the other thing it does is actually add to something else that you said earlier, Chris, which is it makes it even that much more of a naval movie, where we're specifically getting, you sunk my battleship with this. It's a battle. It's a battle between two war generals, essentially.
And if you look back at Star Trek episodes, I mean, there's the classic episode Balance of Terror, where Kirk takes on, which is one of the greatest episodes of the original series, where he takes on a Romulan warship. And that's great ship to ship. And if you watch that episode now, they've enhanced all the effects.
Yeah. Which I actually don't like all the time.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on that. But
yeah.
But what was thrilling about this movie, both as a kid and now, is that like the two ships are exchanging naval broadsides, right? As they're going alongside each other, and they clearly are shooting for that whole feel. And it's absolutely thrilling. And when Kirk gets his game face on, and you just see his tactical mastery, with Spock always by his side, as Shane mentioned, Khan really couldn't compete with that because he didn't have the know-how to operate that ship the way his adversary did. And I think they explore that really well.
And think about when we were that age, Chris. I know that they played trailers on TV without knowing what was happening. I remember distinctly you'd have like barely, like, I'm going to use like this corner of the screen for those that are watching. You had like the Enterprise here, and you had this other ship just coming right over top of it or right under it, but you only saw part of the saucer section. You had no idea what the design was. So some discussion that would go on that I can remember was, why are there two Enterprises? Because at that time, you really didn't see many other ships in Star Trek, all. Certainly not in the films. It's like, well, wow, what happened? Why are there two Enterprises? And then to find out that it's the science vessel Reliant, the way it's designed, but he brutally turned it into a warship rather than a science vessel, which is what it was. Just phenomenal tactical mindset in that capacity to take advantage of what he had at his disposal, but nowhere near the experience to do it effectively.
Murd, what did you think of Montalban as Khan?
Well, he gave Shatner a run for his money in scenery consumption. Yes, but he's I agree. You could feel the intensity of his emotion. Just this fallen prince of men, just trapped on this lifeless rock for 15 years, and just feeling his resentment seethe and just resolve itself into a fine broth, just waiting for his opportunity to strike back. The one thing I don't really see, though, I mean, I agree with all of your earlier observations about his performance, but the whole bit about his dead wife and how you felt his pain with that's another reason, in addition to just the personal tragedy it was for the actress who originally played Lieutenant MacGyver's. It's also a shame she couldn't be in this movie, just so we could actually feel a little more of his sense of loss. Because as it is, it kind of feels like something that the writers name-checked in the script a couple of times as a way of fleshing out, and justifying this psychotic Ahab-like hatred that Khan has developed for Kirk. He blames him for the death of his wife, not just for his being marooned on this once fertile and paradisical, but now lifeless rock of a planet.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Yeah.
Indeed. What now? We've all seen Space Seed, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so what do we think of like Montalban's performance of Khan from that into the film? Do we think it works well in terms of like a set piece, or?
I think so.
Yeah, I think it's natural progression. Honestly,
Yeah.
what this movie had to do more than anything else that came before, not just having the title of Star Trek II, this was the first real sequel for a Star Trek movie. You know, it was not just, it wasn't a sequel, you know, not just to the Star Trek movie franchise, it was a sequel to an episode.
Yeah.
And you had to capture that episode in the performance here. And Montalban, I think, did that in spades. I think he did what he had to do.
And think about what you're doing at this time period by choosing this. There were 80 episodes of the original series over 3 seasons.
Yep.
You certainly had other episodes that were just as compelling. I mean, take Mirror Mirror, for example. They could have easily gone with that and created a sequel with that in some capacity, but they chose Space Seed and built something so special at that time and needed for that franchise that I can't imagine them doing it any other way now that it's all these years later.
I'll tell you what, Shane, had they done Mirror Mirror, I don't think Star Trek II would have succeeded.
No, not near like it did with Wrath of Khan. No.
Why do you say that, Ian?
Because it's a gimmick. And
yeah, it would have been too cheesy.
Exactly, especially after Star Trek 1 was considered a disappointment. You know, looking back on it today, it is what it is, and there's a lot to it. You know, what does a god need with a spaceship? You know, it's all is what it is, but it underperformed. And I think that going into it, had you had the villains of the second Star Trek film literally be the actors themselves, that I don't know how well that would have played on screen, and I don't know how well the audiences would have taken to it. Instead, they went with one of the most well-received episodes of the original series,
which had a villain,
which had an actual villain, and built upon it, and you know, created something incredibly special.
Yeah, and gave you and like you said before, it gave you real life consequences to some of Kirk's decisions at that time, because he could have easily just kept Khan in the brig and put him in Starfleet jail, and that would have been it.
Yeah,
but that could have caused other problems. This way, he was more or less self-contained with almost no real possibility of getting off that planet in any time.
Yeah, Khan was too dangerous to let him just traipse around on Federation planets, for example.
Now, in this day and age of everything being scanned and censored, how you cannot know that SETI Alpha 5 exploded from Starfleet and send a science vessel out there and still not realize that one planet is missing.
Yeah,
that's a big kind of plot hole, but you kind of forget that for how entertaining the movie is.
Well, I mean, you know, also, you know, Kirk having a bad Skype connection with
well, they were jamming it.
I know, but it's just funny, like looking at it today. You know, I mean, we're all here on a Zoom call, and like, this was space age technology for then, and yet, you know, how far we've come.
and some of what we talk about with bringing things from the past, it's not like they didn't try it in Star Trek 1, and this I will give them credit for, because Decker is the son of his father in the show from the Doomsday Machine.
I don't remember specifically.
Oh yeah, that was Captain Decker that sacrificed himself to save the Enterprise at the Doomsday Machine, and this is kind of supposed to be his son, if I remember right, from the motion picture.
Shane, you were just clutch today, man.
Everything's connected. Literally everything is connected. The way I look at it. I need to touch on overacting one more time.
Oh, please.
This is
Star Trek discussion.
Oh my God. This is a well documented overacting moment that was curbed thanks to director Nicholas Meyer. In the commentary for the Blu-ray, there was a moment where Kirk and Spock, you know, used the prefix code to sabotage the Reliant. Shatner kept overacting the line, "Here it comes now." And according to Meyer, Shatner kept overselling the line no matter how many times they did it, until he forced him to do it over and over again, until Shatner was so bored that he just did the line as it was supposed to be said, and they moved forward there. So it was not a, you say sabotage, I say sabotage.
It's coming through now, Con. Is that the line you're talking about? That
well,
line?
then he says it's more when after they've punched the code in and Spock's just waiting to hit the last button to lower the shields of the Reliant.
Yep.
He says,
Here it comes now.
"Here it comes
Oh,
now."
yeah,
and
okay.
Spock hits the button and then boop, 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 boop. Everything goes down.
I'm sure originally it was here it comes now. There's
But
a thing on the wing.
But to a certain extent, I wouldn't have it any other way because that's the character. I mean, that's what we loved about the old show up to that point.
No, absolutely.
Something else interesting when you had that picture up there of Khan on the view screen. I always kind of assumed that, again, at a young age at that time, that they at least heard each other speak the lines back and forth, maybe through recordings or something, but they really never met on set either because the set of the Reliant is the set of the Enterprise. So none of them were ever even on the same set at the same time filming stuff. I mean, they might have visited once in a while, I guess, but there's nothing like giving the lines back to back as far as I know, because it was the same set just redressed.
Wow.
On another note, look at those real pecs.
There have been rumors for years that he was wearing a fake chest. And no, that's all Montalbaum, baby.
That's real. That's real. That guy must have done push-ups till the cows came home. Like that's guy was ripped.
Oh my god. And yet the Montalbaum that I will always hear in my head is straight from Freakazoid, and I cannot help it because that's what I heard him in most when I was growing up. Now, Jocko, no need for profanity.
I think of him as the villain in the first Naked Gun film.
Ah, nice, good.
Nope, I don't even think about that. I can't even tell you that I've seen that movie whole the way through once.
He's great in that franchise.
Too. I mean, you haven't even seen the Naked Gun 33rd and a third?
Nope. Nope.
Oh boy.
I also loved the way they flesh out Khan. So in the original Space Seed, they established that obviously he's very literate and he's very well versed in history. And he and Kirk had that exchange about Milton and Paradise Lost. And then they show his little library in the cargo ship when Chekhov comes across it, Moby Dick, King Lear, Milton. So just the well-rounded Khan.
Do wonder where those came from, because it's not like they took the Botany Bay and loaded it onto the cargo bay. Maybe they did, I don't know. But I was curious where they got some of that stuff.
The Botany Bay.
We got to get out of here now. Damn. I remember as a kid, the whole sandstorm and they're out, like the atmospheric suits they had on. I was so taken with all that, just the way it looked.
Oh yeah,
because it was just kind of like Star Wars. Like everything was like just kind of worn and dirty, and like the way they set those scenes was really well done.
I thought Dune also like some of the
sure.
Certainly, yeah.
Well, and especially they came out of nowhere. Like they're trying to open the door, they go to escape, and boom, there they are.
So, Murd, as a grown man, how did the slug scene affect you?
I was okay with it.
Okay.
The thing was actually both more and less horrifying than I remembered it. I mean, it's a bobbit worm is kind of inherently more disturbing than a crayfish is, because somehow that's how my juvenile mind interpreted the thing when it came slithering out of Chekhov's ear canal. It looked like a little crayfish on the floor. Yeah. But so yeah, it's more horrifying looking. But if you had to have your choice between a little annelid worm eel thing, relatively sleek aerodynamic body, and like the chitinous exoskeleton of a crayfish with its pincers and its spiny legs, which one would you rather have crawling towards your brain?
Yeah.
I would go eel worm in a minute.
In later years, I often thought the slug that's in Wrath of Khan is the mirror verse of a babelfish from Hitchhikers. Benefits from the babelfish, but not from the Khan bug.
I'm gonna go with Mr. Mind. Let's just go with Mr. Mind.
Oh yes,
yeah.
The post-crisis Mr. Mind, the one that.
It was also fun how heavily they leaned into Moby Dick in this film. Obviously the Ahab references.
Yep, just showing it on Khan's bookshelf on board one of the remains of the Botany Bay.
Yep, and his first mate trying to dissuade him from this, ill-fated course they were taking.
Yep. So he gets to play Starbuck.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
The best villain is an obsessive villain. One that won't take no for an answer, even when no is the only answer.
Yeah.
And that's 100% the personality of Khan that's presented in this film.
And what's so powerful and chilling about the idea of Khan is that, and you see this especially in the Space Seed episode too, is that in many ways he's a very refined, dignified figure, well-mannered, his etiquette, but lurking beneath that is just an extreme savagery. I mean, like the fact that they mentioned how he's murdered all the scientists, they don't show it happening, but they slit their throats.
Yeah.
They allude to all of that. And I'll agree with you to some extent, Ian, if I can jump into darkness a little bit here, is that I think they did a wonderful job showing the brutality of Khan in the new film, but they didn't really go into those elements of Khan that make him also sort of dangerously attractive.
Yes.
In Into Darkness, he's just utterly savage and brutal. Like, I mean, he crushes Peter Weller's head. Granted, he had been used as a pawn and all that, so you understand. Sure. But it's the Khan of the original Khan has all these dimensions to him that, Shane, you read the comic they did? I think I talked about it in the air. They did a year or so ago where they had a one shot of Khan. Remember that book?
I do. I did not read it yet, but I do remember. Yeah.
Well, let me know what you think of it, because they go into the character more. It's very interesting. But
yeah. Well, and the thing about Khan, especially in Space Seed, and then it's exemplified in Wrath of Khan, is so he is regal, he's majestic, he is worldly leader in some ways, and like you said, just underlying that, the savagery. But that's where the gene manipulation fails, where Spock's line about, well, superior breed brings superior ambition.
Yep.
And it's absolutely true, because he thinks he can do no wrong and he can win at all costs, because, well, why should he have to give up? He's superior in every way, but that's his fault. I mean, that's what his downfall is.
And that's his downfall in both Space Seed and in the movie, because he makes assumptions about his abilities that reality gets in the way of that. Like, for example, in the original episode, he tells Kirk, I find your talents interesting, but frankly, Captain, I'm superior to you in every way. And then, Kirk beats him with like that plastic tube,
right,
in the battle, in the engine room.
I'll tell you what. Since you brought up Into Darkness, let me touch on the other thing that Into Darkness will never be able to do that this one did, and that is the actual death scene of Spock. When Into Darkness reversed it and had it be Kirk instead of Spock, I rolled my eyes more than else.
Even as little as I know about Star Trek, I was right there with you, Ian.
Yeah, I was too.
Well, part of the reason I think this scene is so powerful is that you have the weight of 3 TV seasons behind it.
Yes.
So there's a long-standing dynamic between these two characters, and then there's the one thing that this scene that I always love. It's such a great touch. I don't know if it's Nimoy's idea or Myers. When Spock stands up, because he's in the presence of a superior officer, he adjusts his tunic.
Exactly.
Even though he's dying. It's such a great touch. It just nails the character so perfectly.
I just noticed that for the first time on this new watching of it that I did for this episode of the show. And I agree with you entirely. Nothing could be more Spock than that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and at this time there was absolutely no internet, no hint that this was going to happen. Yeah, you could kind of surmise it. Maybe it's going to happen based on the Kobayashi Maru in the beginning, but I certainly didn't. Then to have it happen was an absolute blindside to the audience. As soon as you hear Into Darkness that it's Khan, you're like, oh, are they going to do that again? Yeah, they're going to do. Oh, they did it again. Oh, they did it bad. Whereas this is, like you said, 3 seasons, a movie. This is years of conventions and love for these characters, and all of a sudden one of the main ones is just to save the ship.
And not to mention the way that Spock does it, the fact that he tricks McCoy the way he did, gives him the nerve pinch, knocks him out, goes in there, grabs the gloves off of Scotty, and then goes in there and sacrifices himself for the greater good. And it's perfect. It's
perfectly logical, but it's also extremely emotional.
Yes.
That's Spock.
That's
right?
Spock.
He's half human. So
to a T.
Think back to the classic Muck Time episode.
Oh,
which is
yes.
one of the greatest of the original series. When Spock is in heat during the Vulcan mating ritual, and he and Kirk are forced to fight, and then he thinks he's killed Kirk, and then when Kirk reappears, he's like, Jim, and like, oh, Captain, I'm so relieved to see that you're all right. And but it's so their dynamic is what. And let me say this one: I'm gonna root for Into Darkness again here a little bit. The one moment where Leonard Nimoy appears in that movie on screen, and Quinto asks him, like, tell me about Khan. And you see Leonard Nimoy's face, and you see like a shadow come across it.
Yeah.
And it's great acting. And he's like, how did you beat him? And he said, at great cost.
Yeah.
And frankly, that's where that movie was at its best.
Mm-hmm.
Where that movie was at its worst was, we really liked Wrath of Khan. Let's just do it again.
And let's try and trick him.
That encapsulates Hollywood's thinking entirely too often these days.
Yeah,
I
agree.
I mean, look at the Jurassic World movie that's out right now. It's I have yet to see it. I'm probably going to go see it this weekend, even if it is a stinker. But everything that I see about that one is like, oh hey, let's go back to the well. Let's get everybody back, and then not actually make a good movie. Like where's the disconnect with Into Darkness? I just wanted, even if you were going to bring back Khan, fine. I've already stated my issues with the casting. If you'd given me something that was at least unique, that while building upon the character, ended differently enough and presented the character in a way that I had not already seen the character. Instead, saw the character again. And okay, great, sure.
And I appreciate the change that they tried to do, where they had Kirk and Khan work together a little bit longer and a little bit better to a common goal, but it just, to me, it fell apart at the end anyway.
Agreed. Yeah. And
another thing I'd say, I'm sorry, Ian, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
No, I was going to jump back to this for a second, in that I also, DeForest Kelley should get so much love for his performance as Bones throughout all of these, because in some ways he's the most human character.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also the point of view character of the audience, like what the hell is going on here? And just the way he expresses himself, and his love's bickering with Spock, which for me is always one of the highlights of the whole concept, is just that those two characters and how they clearly have this deep affection for each other, but they're so diametrically different in every way.
Yeah.
And I think in this movie they really captured that again in that scene where, like, you green-blooded inhuman, we're talking about universal Armageddon. And it just and I have to say, Carl Urban nails McCoy. Nails him in the new films. Nails him completely. But their dynamic is just wonderful.
I love, and I know this is going to be a Star Trek 3 thing, but I love when they realize what's going on with McCoy, and he says, that green-blooded son of a bitch. It's his revenge for me winning all those arguments all those years.
Yep.
That's the way he remembers it, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. And I wouldn't want it any other way, because that's McCoy.
Yep. No, it's just, and again, I think this movie is for me the greatest Star Trek film, is all the elements that are at the core of what makes Star Trek great, I think, are just in this movie.
Yeah.
I just think they really captured everything that for me I've always loved about. Granted, this is my first real introduction to it, so that's going to have an impact too. But having watched this movie like Shane a gazillion times since I was 9 years old, I still love it just as much, and in many ways more, just because I'm just older and appreciate things I would appreciate when I was 9. But
and I love going right from this into Star Trek 3, and for me the whole first part of that movie is a love, because it's not only Star Trek and it continues what's happening here, but it's a heist movie, at least the first half.
Yeah.
It's just a quintessential.
Don't call me tiny.
It's just awesome the way they do it.
Plus, the great thing about 3 for me, and again, so I saw that my parents took me to all 3 of those in the movies. I was lucky to have that experience. So that was 1984. So I was 11. The Klingons blew me away. Because you saw them briefly in the original film in their new guise, like their new appearance. But you really see them full on in 3, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And it's only gotten better and better for me as I got older because you can appreciate the whole samurai influence and what they're clearly drawing on with the whole concept. And, and of course, let's go back to we don't speak about this with outsiders because of why they look differently in the 1960s. But
right,
great stuff.
Sorry, Shane. I just wanted to touch in here real quick. Just bring it back to McCoy before we move forward. What I appreciate about McCoy is that, in a lot of ways, he's the Archie Bunker archetype.
Yes, well put.
He's the lovable curmudgeon. The guy who hates as much as he loves, but loves more than he hates.
And he's a lot smarter than Archie Bunker. But anyway,
definitely. Yeah. And he brings that to the crew and as well to his relationships with both Spock and Kirk. Because
and there's always that crusty, edgy humor he brings to everything. Like, well, what about my performance? Or when it rains, it pours. I mean, he's and Ian, I love the scene you selected to play in the beginning of this episode because he's the one guy who can like really call Kirk on anything he's doing, and Kirk will listen to him.
Yep.
It's that wonderful dynamic.
Yeah.
So.
Something I did correct though over time, I believe it was for the 35th anniversary. They re-released it in theaters. I did go down to Lidditz, which is maybe 20 minutes down the road from me, and I did get to see it in a theater for the first time 5 years ago. Was Wrath of Khan, so that was kind of cool to be able to have that experience.
Yeah, one of these days, I mean, I know that they're re-releasing it as part of the anniversary.
Isn't Shatner doing a tour for it? I
believe
I heard
don't
that.
know.
Might be at certain theaters. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would love to see this in the theaters just once because like
it was awesome.
I still think one of my greatest achievements that I've had as a moviegoer and as a nerd was at the King's Theater in Brooklyn. They renovated the whole thing. They reopened it as a theater, and the first movie that they showed, because it's just a theater usually, but they brought a screen down onto the stage and they showed all 3 Star Wars.
Oh wow!
Back to back to back, and I sat in the theater and I watched it. And it was wonderful. I've never really had that experience with the original Star Treks, and I'd love to see Wrath of Khan in the theater at least.
Yeah, it's awesome to see.
I had a similar experience to Shane in that when my future wife and stepsons were living in upstate New York, they were little kids, and some local theater, I don't even remember why, because it wasn't an anniversary, was playing the movie. So I had the thrill of taking essentially my kids who were very young to see Wrath of Khan.
Oh, nice.
It was, and there were a couple.
Awesome.
There were a couple people in the theater, like in Star Trek costumes, of course, and it was a lot, and they enjoyed it too. They were very young, but they enjoyed it. But it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
It's a good. I think it's a great movie. Like if you want to get somebody to enjoy or appreciate Star Trek, this is the movie you have them watch.
Absolutely.
If you can have them watch one of the films, because I just think it's very accessible again for all the reasons we've talked about. The villain, the space combat. And the humor, like Star Trek has to have humor. There has to be that banter between the characters, and I think it just enriches everything when there is. So,
yeah,
wonderful history between them.
And as much as this one has a great antagonist and great drama, great space battles with Navy kind of implications, Star Trek 4 also brings out the humor so much
absolutely.
Thoroughly without making it so silly that it's ridiculous. I mean,
you mean
even
Spock,
though it is ridiculous.
Spock's LDS trip?
Yeah. LDS. It's just brilliant. For me, it's just the way that this universe and these writers from the show to the movies can take the subject matter and make it relevant, make it funny, make it serious, make it dramatical. It runs the whole gambit, and it survives through all these years and still just as relevant as it was 50 years ago.
Absolutely.
Beautifully put, my friend. And I want to note for the record that you should trademark. You just created one of your words, one of your Shane words.
What's that?
Dramatical, tremendous.
Dramatical, yes.
Dramatical.
I love Shane words.
I want that on.
There's a lot of them.
I want dramatical on a T-shirt. Let's make that.
It makes sense. It sounds like a real word.
Of course,
it absolutely does.
It now is a real word.
Yes, you have. You
can have dope.
This may not.
You can have dope in the Webster's dictionary. You can have dramatic.
What do we think of One thing I also love about actually, let's talk about David. We haven't talked about David
Oh.
yet. What do we think about the dynamic they established between Kirk and his son in this film? Because
I
he
love
meets a,
that by
meets
the-
a tragic end in the next one. So
Yeah.
I love that by the end of Star Trek 2, he comes to appreciate what his father can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of his father in him, even though he never knew it
Absolutely.
all these years,
yeah.
to cheat his way into getting the results he needed.
Yep. 'Cause-
But we don't learn that until the next one. But still,
Right.
it's there.
Yep.
One thing that these Star Trek movies prove time and again is that Kirk does not get to be happy for very long.
No.
And
Nope.
and we get at least a glimmer of happiness, even in defeat, because his best friend has just died, but he gets to
got a son.
He's got a son.
Yeah.
He gets to reconnect with him, and it's a shining light for him in that moment. Offering him a drink and sitting down and sort of bonding with him in ways that he clearly had never been able to before. It was
Well,
it
and
was
not
a
at first
good
though.
moment.
He was trying to get out of that room and just be the captain, but his son stopped him and then made that connection. So I don't know that if David wouldn't have stopped him, Kirk wouldn't have had that connection, but it benefits him because he stopped and listened to his son.
And to go back, you make a great point, because, and the movie really explores this, like Kirk's whole real reason for being is to be a captain of a starship. Outside of those borders, he's not very functional.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you go, I mean, a lot of people don't like it, but I still do. If you go to Star Trek 5,
there's a lot of good in Star Trek 5.
There's great character moments in Star Trek 5.
Yeah.
Like when they're camping together, and when Kirk is like climbing that mountain, and it's what he's doing is crazy basically, but it's like he's like an adrenaline junkie. Like he needs to have these impossible tasks, because otherwise, like you can imagine, he's getting like incredibly bored, or just doesn't know what to do with himself.
And that's something that the reboot movies actually get right, is the adrenaline,
very much so.
The
Absolutely.
adrenaline junkie aspect of Kirk is certainly there. And I mean, we see in the beginnings of this movie, the fact that he can't let go, the fact that he can't just be an admiral and train the next generation before Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's very apparent here. And he does his best to try to connect with that next generation, which is literally his son, and doesn't really get much time to do so.
Now here's a line from Star Trek 6 that I don't think works well based on what happens in Star Trek 2 and 3. No, I'm sorry, not 6. It's Generations.
Okay.
When they go with the Next Generation cast. In the beginning, they're on the Excelsior, and you have, who is it? I think it's Chekhov. Introduces
and
Kirk
Scotty are with Kirk,
But Chekhov introduces Kirk to Sulu's daughter.
Yes, yeah.
And Kirk says, "How did Sulu have time to have a family? When did he find time for this?" Well, that to me, after his relationship with David in 2 and 3, and his emotions in 6, even for it, that line that Kirk says kind of doesn't make any sense to me, and I think it's poorly written because he knew exactly what could have happened to have that kind of family. He just chose not to do it that way. He chose a different path. That doesn't mean that he couldn't have figured it out, but I just think that line is just so poorly written and so uncharacteristic of where Kirk would have been at that point after all of this that had happened to him.
Agreed. Yeah.
And I know I'm going way out of the box beyond Star
Shane,
Trek
I love
2.
when you go out of the box.
Oh, please.
Talking about.
But you can say inconsistent writing is unfortunately a flaw of a lot of the Star Trek movies.
Oh, sure.
And that's just an instance of not getting the voice correct, Yeah, that happens.
But at the same time, in that, to go back into Generations, and this kind of connects to what we're talking about, Wrath of Khan, Kirk is still struggling with the fact that he really can't leave the chair.
Yeah.
And like that's like he even tells Picard, like, don't let them transfer you. Don't let him give up the ship. So they are very consistent with that theme throughout all these movies about who Kirk really is and really what his limitations are.
But even in that Generations, for that part, for the good part of that scene in the beginning on the Excelsior, even though he wants to stay in that chair, he still comes to mind, say, nope, this isn't my chair.
Right.
You, the new captain, you've got to say, I'll go take care of it. Even though that's his downfall, but it really is his last little bit of growth away from being that junkie that needs to be in the chair all the time.
Yeah, but and yet Kirk literally dies in the chair. You know,
Oh yeah, yeah.
that he had to be Captain Kirk. He couldn't be anything else. Also a note, Shane, we're a comic book podcast. Every time you say Excelsior, you have to say it in Stanley's voice. That's Excelsior.
And Shane, you mentioned Star Trek 6, which I know Murd has seen as well. I love that movie, but in many ways, that's also a nice coda to the events of what goes on in 2 and 3.
Yeah.
In terms of his son and so forth.
Yeah.
Meyer directed 6 too. So.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
I think that this movie is the perfect example of a movie that saves a franchise. You know, a movie.
Oh, without question.
A movie that
without question.
Without this, we would not be sitting here with Paramount Plus shows to appreciate. Because had this movie turned out differently and flopped, then back to the drawing board and possibly never even touching Star Trek again.
Ian, if you read behind the scenes, I'm sure you have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Star Trek, this 79 original, did underperform financially, correct? Or did it do well financially? It underperformed, right?
It underperformed.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people see it as very long and plotting. I think there are elements of it that are worth watching. But anyway,
I do too.
And I think they must have scaled down the budget probably for the second film.
Yeah.
I would think. And I know they brought in new writers, like you see the name Harv Bennett. He was involved in all of the later films. And again, I think they kind of just. I think Roddenberry was opposed to the whole naval direction they were taking.
Oh, he definitely was. Yeah.
In the second film,
and he was boosted down from executive producer to just consultant for that very reason. You know, this was not a direction that they wanted. They knew that while Gene Roddenberry, embodied Star Trek, that it may very well be time to let other people take the chair. And it proved to be correct in this instance. It's not always the case, but it was in this instance.
And yet still had enough thoughtfulness, and I don't mean like I mean intelligent thinking to, once the movies were successful, to let Gene do something he also always wanted to do. I think was Next Generation, and even though I was not thrilled at first, once you get past the first season or two, that really does grow and become spectacular.
I'm sorry. I just looked at the budgets for comparison, and
let's hear it.
Boy, were you right, Chris. The budget for Star Trek, the motion picture, was $44 million in 1979 money.
Wow.
The budget for Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, in 1982 money was $12 million.
Wow.
Yeah. In comparison, $139 million were made at the box office for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, $97 million at the box office for Star Trek II. But considering how little it took to make the movie,
that's a huge windfall.
That's a huge windfall. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And probably all the critique around it, at least from fans, if not critics. I don't know what critics said. I don't really care. But for the outpour of thrill from the fans at that time, that just pushed, maybe we need to make another one, because 2 was really well received by the people that care, that matter the most about it.
Oh yeah.
Right, but the motion picture did it. I mean, it made money.
It made money, but it just critically underperformed. And frankly, I think they were looking for their Star Wars.
Without question.
Oh, they totally were.
Everybody was in the early 80s.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, look at Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers, all coming out bang bang right.
Yeah,
on the heels
none of those would have probably been made without
No.
Star Wars.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, definitely.
And to say Star Trek 1 made money, it did, but it made money because so many people who were fans wanted to see it. It underperformed. It was not well received, but it was too late. Everybody had already bought their ticket to see it, and it made its money.
Well, I remember reading. I read years ago. I don't have it anymore, but Shatner wrote a book about the movies. He wrote a book about the series, then about the movies. I remember the one about the movies, and I think he said he was nodding off while watching the premiere of the original motion picture.
I could see him
saying it. Wow.
Yeah.
Even he can't hold his own attention.
Well, also let's focus on the fact that Sulu almost wasn't in Star Trek 2 because he was that disappointed with Star Trek 1. And
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah,
interesting.
there's a scene that's written into there that I just saw the other day on YouTube somewhere, where they talk when they're taking the shuttle over to the Enterprise in the beginning of Star
Are they
Trek
talking about
2.
him becoming a captain or
They're
something?
talking about him getting
Okay.
the Excelsior, and he would have been on for the training, and that would have been it.
Yeah, and frankly, I mean, even though they have a storied rivalry, apparently it was Shatner who convinced him to come back for Star Trek 2. So either they were on good speaking terms at the time, or he was like, come to the set and punch me in the face, and then we can go ahead and get things started. So I don't know exactly which direction they went with that.
Well, to me, the Sulu character is always one of my favorites because he's such a utterly competent, capable officer.
Oh yeah.
And Kirk in the story so relies on him for tactical knowledge, his work as a helmsman.
Yeah.
Like he's one of those characters is like one of the real rocks of the whole crew.
Certainly.
And from the series or the movies, they always establish how utterly capable Sulu is in a wide variety of ways.
I loved getting to see him captain the Excelsior in Star Trek 6. I loved his little
great.
guest spot with the same crew for the Voyager episode.
Yes.
And there are, I want to say there are a few radio drama like books that are full cast with him as the captain.
Oh, really?
I'm pretty sure there are.
I think you're right about that. Yeah, it might even be the same guys who do the Doctor Who stuff, but well,
that would be Big Finish over in the UK. I don't think they did it, but maybe they did.
Yeah, let's see.
I just don't remember seeing Big Finish before Doctor Who stuff.
Fair enough. Yeah. But I also, just because we haven't really mentioned her, it's always just great to see Nichelle Nichols.
Oh yeah.
I mean, she's a star. Even
pure grace and dignity.
Oh my God. Yeah. And even in the supporting role that she essentially was in this, like she didn't have a lot to do in this movie, to be fair. But it's just great seeing her, and she just radiates personality and essence every time she's on the screen.
Well, there's always a wonderful anecdote I always go back to with her, where if you read behind the scenes, apparently she was dissatisfied and wanted to quit the show. And Martin Luther King Jr. said, this is one of my favorite shows, and it's very important that you remain on this show because you're what you're representing. Because this is the 1960s. There's not like there's a ton of leading or supporting African American characters in a lot of these television shows, and obviously that had an impact on her. But when you think about her performances, like especially in the later movies, they give her a lot more to do.
Oh yeah.
And she has a lot more of a role to play in stories going forward. But great character. I always think about in the Mirror episode when she has to decoy the sinister Sulu on the bridge, and just wonderful performance. Or the classic interracial kiss between her and Kirk.
Oh yeah,
sure. It's in the third season, but
oh boy, Shane, I may have found what you were looking for, and maybe there's other ones as well. But it's called Star Trek Cacophony. It was released in 1994 and 1995. It's essentially the Captain Sulu adventures.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Now,
is this a radio drama or a book?
It basically a radio drama, like an audio drama.
Like a full cast. I'm pretty sure all the players are there.
Yep. Yeah. It says a Captain Sulu adventure starring George Takei. Presented on compact disc.
Yep. That sounds right.
Hopefully it still exists somewhere, and hopefully there is actually, I guarantee you there's got to be, versions of these that are on the internet somewhere.
I wonder if Yeoman Rand was still part of his crew.
That's a possibility.
Well, I would like to think so. I mean, we'd have to look at it, but she showed up in that Voyager episode.
Well, and it also, wasn't Wesley Crusher technically a member of his crew at one point?
Oh, that I don't know.
I could be wrong, but I may be conflating two different things here. But I remember at some point there was, I think for the Star Trek ride, there were Excelsior crew members like included in the backstory for that.
Well, he would have had to travel back 80 years in time to do that.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe it was a later version, and I may just be conflating two things in my brain here because Star Trek is hard to keep track of. But
Oh yeah.
Yep.
But it's possible.
Indeed. Well, anything else you want to touch on, gents?
Murd, any other closing thoughts you might have?
Not really. No.
Yeah.
Well, then how many fricking swears do we give it, and how many of us say 5 out of 5?
Yeah. 15 out of 5.
How many would you give it, Murd?
4.5.
There you go.
And something to note for people who might be listening and like, oh God, Star Trek, they're still talking about it. I'm sure there are more of us out there, but I am a unique. It's done in one of the very early episodes of CGS.
Mhm.
I am definitely a fan of both Star Wars and Star Trek. There is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. You like what you like, and I like them both. But
Well,
if
they're
you're
totally
not
different. Star Wars is space fantasy, and Star Trek is science fiction.
Yes, thank you.
Sure, yeah.
Something that Brian Deemer always had difficulty grasping, it seems.
No, they're totally different.
Yes,
But
to
with
him,
Star Trek-
science fiction equals things like Star Wars. And Jamie and I were at pains to try to explain to him generic differences, and it just never quite
Debating El Deemer is always a monumental task, my friend.
Yeah. The I lost my train. Oh, if you're not a fan, but you just want to see something fun and space adventure-y where you can still get the point of everything without really knowing the lore behind it, this is a good movie to start.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great entry point.
Again, I watched it as a kid and I enjoyed it thoroughly without knowing much of any of the backstory at all with
Same for
Khan
me.
and
Yep.
Space Seed, and it made perfect sense.
Well, and I will point out episode 315 from October 29th, 2007.
Levinstein.
Star Wars versus Star Trek.
One of the
Oh,
great
boy.
debate episodes.
Yes.
Indeed. Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
And I will say, if you are a fan of Star Trek, especially if you are a fan of this style of Star Trek and Star Trek: The Next Generation, watch the Orville. And I will leave it at
Oh,
that.
yeah. Especially coming from when there was no Star Trek on TV because Paramount Plus wasn't a thing yet.
Mhm.
Orville season 1 is the best Star Trek that had been out in I can't tell you how long.
Yes.
Yeah, I still have to watch that.
And then,
Yeah,
by the way,
it's
Ian,
spectacular.
I noticed this. You'd be proud of me because I had Netflix on, and I finally saw that they had an advertisement because I've been watching Deep Space Nine reruns on Netflix now for years.
Yeah.
It's leaving Netflix on July 1st. I'm assuming it's
Oh.
all going over to Paramount Plus.
it is.
Which
yeah.
is fine.
So-
I mean, I have
Yeah.
Paramount Plus, but
Yeah,
Yeah. They're consolidating everything under the Paramount.
Yep.
banner.
makes sense.
yeah.
Yep.
I've never been a big fan of owning the TV series because they're in reruns so many times, so many places.
Yeah.
However, when iTunes had a sale on Deep Space Nine and I had a $25 gift card for iTunes and I paid $5 for Deep Space Nine.
Oh,
You
wow.
bet your booty I bought it, and I'm enjoying the hell out of
Bet
watching
your
it.
booty. There
Yeah.
we go.
And I own every Star Trek movie on Vudu because I was able to disc to digital that jazz and
Yeah.
pay $2 a pop to own them all. Just
Yeah.
in case
I got almost on Voodoo too.
Sure, you know that's great to have them there. So
Yep.
This was-
Gentlemen, thank you. This is a real treat.
oh,
Yeah, it sure was.
amen. Super glad that we were able to do this, and happy birthday, Wrath of Khan.
Yes.
Yep.
40 years.
Indeed.
40 years.
That's crazy. That is
Insane.
crazy.
Yep. Well, I'll figure out what the next one of these is going to be. It's my
Yes.
pick, and we'll let you guys know what that's going to be when it happens. Because guess what? We don't tell you ahead of time. You get to listen.
Yeah.
Be surprised.
Indeed. Yep. But we are once again sponsored by you guys. A different camera this time. It's a different location of my fingerprints over at patreon.com/comic geek speak. Once again, a big thank you and a round of applause to all of you because you are our best friends. Yes, you are indeed. Yep. We would sacrifice ourselves to keep the starship running to ensure that you, fair listeners, continue to go on to the next movie and then we come back to life.
Wow, Levinson is really waxing rhapsodic here. Holy mackerel.
Either way,
He got lost in himself.
I am loving getting lost in myself when the and patreon.com/comic geek speak. Of course, and then over to Mr. Shano to finish
Yes.
us out.
Visit us at comicgeekspeak.com. To send us an email, the address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. To leave a voicemail, the number is 267-702-6642. Stop by thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com and let us know what you all think of Star Trek II. Look us up on YouTube at youtube.com/comicgeekspeak. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, send in your Muddle the Murds, because I'm sure we need some. If I remember, Ian put out a call for some new Muddle the Murds. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time. Live long and prosper.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was psyched about it, going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything the geeks love, from cakes to laser beams.